Imagine spending like 6 months and maybe $100,000 designing this flawless, beautiful software dashboard.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like the typography is perfect, the animations are just buttery smooth, and the team is completely exhausted but, incredibly proud. Then you finally launch it and you realize something just absolutely devastating.
Nobody uses it.
Nobody actually needs it.
Yeah.
Zero adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there is the really expensive, painful trap of giving people exactly what they ask for.
It is honestly the ultimate product nightmare. And I mean, it happens constantly because we just default to this transactional mindset.
Right, taking orders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Someone asks for a feature and we build it just assuming the request itself is valid. But in software development and user experience design, blindly taking orders is a recipe for building the wrong thing entirely.
And that tension is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. For you, the listener tuning in right now, the stakes today are incredibly high, whether you're a designer, a product manager, or a developer trying to navigate team dynamics.
Yeah, it applies to everyone.
It really does.
Yeah.
We are exploring this comprehensive UX seniority training manual, and our mission today is to extract the core insights, 12 crucial lessons, and all that help UX designers shift from simply making screens to operating as senior product decision makers.
Just setting the stage here, this isn't, it's not a tutorial on which design software to use or anything like that.
Right, no Figma tips today.
Right. It's fundamentally about how anyone in a product team communicates, how they manage the terror of ambiguity, and how they make trade-offs. The manual we're analyzing, it emphasizes product judgment and business acumen over just like visual craft.
Which is huge.
It really is. It maps out a clear evolution across 4 phases of a career. So that's shifting your mindset, aligning your core team, defending your decisions in the boardroom, and finally surviving the brutal reality of delivery.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start with that first phase, the mindset shift. Because before a senior designer even touches a design tool, they have to completely redefine their role, right? The manual talks about this move from defining yourself by your outputs to defining yourself by your contribution.
Right. So if you ask a junior designer what they do, they usually just list outputs.
Like deliverables.
Exactly. They'll say, I make wireframes, I build prototypes, I organize handoff files.
Yeah.
And those outputs are real, obviously, but they're just artifacts. It's very comforting to open your design software and just start drawing because it feels like progress.
You look busy.
You look very busy, but a senior designer defines their role entirely differently. They say, I reduce ambiguity. I help the team make better decisions before development even starts.
So the screens are really just a byproduct of the actual job.
That's exactly it. The screens are just tools to facilitate understanding. The true value is moving the team from an unclear, messy problem space to a usable, buildable solution.
That reframing makes total sense, especially when you look at how designers handle incoming requests.
Yeah.
Like the manual highlights this classic scenario, right? A stakeholder bursts into the room and says, we need a new dashboard, or add a tooltip here.
Oh, the classic tooltip request.
Right, and the junior instinct is to just say, you got it, and immediately start sketching a dashboard.
Because, again, that feels productive.
Yeah.
You're doing the work, but a senior professional recognizes that we need a dashboard is not a problem.
It's a solution.
Exactly. It's a proposed solution to a problem that hasn't actually been diagnosed yet.
It makes me think about building a bridge. It's like going to a doctor. Well, wait, let me use the bridge analogy first, actually.
Go for it.
A junior engineer might just look at the request for a bridge and immediately start calculating the steel requirements for the cars. But a senior engineer stops and tests the soil it's going to stand on first.
Right.
Or, and here's that doctor analogy, it's like going to a doctor. A junior designer just writes the prescription you asked for. A senior designer asks why your arm hurts before handing over the painkillers.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. The senior designer asks diagnostic questions. They say, what specific business decision is this dashboard supposed to support? Or who is actually experiencing this friction?
They're digging.
Yeah, you're trying to excavate the underlying need. Asking those questions avoids the trap of designing the wrong thing. And crucially, it avoids those massive months-long discovery phases.
Because nobody wants that.
No.
Yeah.
You're getting to the root cause through targeted inquiry rather than, boiling the ocean with endless user research.
Nobody wants a 3-month research phase just to add a button.
Exactly.
But you still absolutely need to know what the button is supposed to achieve. So you test the soil, you diagnose the true problem. And once that's done, you move into the next phase, which is alignment. A designer can't solve this in a vacuum. They have to engineer a shared reality alongside the core team, which is usually product managers and developers.
And this is where the theory hits the really messy reality of team dynamics. Let's look at the relationship with product managers first.
Okay.
Weaker operational language in a team sounds like the PM gives me requirements and I design them.
That sounds like a factory line.
Right, it creates a rigid factory line handoff. But a senior UX professional doesn't just take requirements, they partner with the PM to actually shape the scope.
What does that look like in practice, though? Are they just, like, arguing over the roadmap?
Not arguing, but challenging the assumptions behind it. They're actively helping the PM figure out the priority and define the minimum viable product, the MVP.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, they might look at a list of 10 requirements and ask, is this advanced filtering feature essential for the MVP to provide value? Or can we move it to a later release to save a week of development time? They're balancing user value against business pressure.
Which flows directly into the relationship with developers, which arguably might be the most critical dynamic on the entire team. The source material insists that senior designers involve developers incredibly early to discuss feasibility.
Yes, incredibly early.
Rather than, dropping a massive finalized file on them at the very end of the sprint.
You never want feasibility to be a surprise. You need to know early on if the data you want to display is actually accessible from the back end, or if the interaction you're dreaming up requires custom front-end work that the engineering team simply doesn't have the bandwidth for.
But wait, let me push back on this because I can hear some designers listening to this right now and just tensing up.
I know they are.
That is a really tough pill to swallow. As a designer, your instinct is to obsess over those details and fight for the best possible experience, right? Yeah. So let's say you design a highly intuitive, custom drag-and-drop feature, and the developer says it's too hard to build right now. Shouldn't the UX designer fight tooth and nail for that? If you just accept the technical constraint, aren't you essentially compromising your standards and, well, failing the user?
It's a very common friction point, and honestly, it's why so many design engineering relationships turn completely toxic.
Right.
But the manual clarifies a vital distinction here. A senior designer protects the intent of the design, not every single detail.
Protect the intent. Walk me through how that applies to the drag-and-drop scenario.
Okay, so if you fight for that custom drag and drop because it's the quote-unquote ideal experience, you might delay the release by 3 weeks.
Right.
A delayed release helps 0 users. What is the actual intent of the feature? It's probably just allowing the user to reorder a list, right?
Yeah, just moving items up and down.
Exactly. So if an existing standard table component with up and down arrows solves that core need for the MVP, accepting that technical constraint is excellent product judgment.
Yeah.
You are delivering value quickly.
I see. So you have to swallow your pride a bit. You aren't giving up on the user. You're recognizing that shipping a slightly less elegant solution today is way better than shipping absolutely nothing for a month.
Precisely. And making those judgment calls relies heavily on evidence, which brings up another major distinction the manual makes. It's the difference between being research-dependent and being evidence-led.
Because, not every team have a dedicated UX researcher or the budget for a massive formal usability study.
Right, and a weaker designer will use that as an excuse. They'll say, well, we can't move forward until we run a 2-week study.
They just freeze.
Yeah, they become totally paralyzed by a lack of perfect data. But a senior designer doesn't panic. They're evidence-led. If formal research isn't available, they look for other signals to reduce risk.
Like?
They pull analytics, they read raw customer support tickets, they interview the sales team, they gather whatever evidence is available, and then they are fiercely transparent about what is a solid fact versus what is simply a team assumption.
They calibrate their confidence, like, we know X for a fact based on analytics, but we are assuming Y about user behavior, so let's just monitor Y post-launch.
Exactly that.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the problem and we've aligned the immediate builders. But now we have to step into the third phase, which is the boardroom. Because aligning the immediate team is one thing, but navigating subjective opinions from stakeholders is a completely different beast.
The boardroom is where designs go to die if you don't know how to defend them.
Oh, absolutely.
Stakeholders usually communicate in solutions, or worse, entirely subjective opinions. They'll look at a complex workflow and say, make the button bigger, or can we just cram everything onto one page?
The classic terrifying feedback of make it pop.
Right.
How does a senior professional even respond to that without either rolling their eyes or completely ruining the design?
Well, a junior designer will usually just follow the feedback literally and ruin the layout, or they'll get defensive and start quoting design theory.
Which nobody wants to hear.
Nobody. A senior designer translates that subjective feedback back into intent. If a marketing VP says, make the primary button way bigger, the senior response isn't to start arguing about pixel ratios. They ask, are we concerned that users won't be able to find the next step, or is there a specific conversion target we're worried about missing here?
You're excavating for the business goal, hiding underneath the bad critique.
What's fascinating here is how the source material anchors this in established industry frameworks to keep meetings on track. For instance, it brings up Atlassian's DCI framework, which stands for Driver, Approver, Contributors, and Informed.
I've heard of DCI, but how does it actually function mechanically to, like, save a design review?
By explicitly assigning roles before the meeting even starts, particularly the one single approver. The framework eliminates that endless loop where 8 different people in the room have an opinion, but nobody actually has the authority to make the final call.
Oh, that is so common.
Right. It pairs perfectly with techniques from the Nielsen-Norman Group on preventing derailed design critiques. You establish up front that the review is going to be measured against the agreed-upon business goals and user constraints. It stops the meeting from devolving into a debate about the CEO's personal color preferences.
That structural discipline is key. And that brings up a really crucial mechanic in the manual, the structure of explaining decisions.
Yeah.
Because the senior designer never, ever says, I just like this layout, or this is standard best practice.
Never. Best practice is a very weak defense. The manual provides a very specific logical sequence for explaining a decision context, user need, design choice, reason, trade-off, and expected outcome.
Okay, let's hear that in action. Instead of saying, I made the button bigger, how would they phrase it using that sequence?
They would say, in the current flow, users are presented with too many options. That's the context. They need a clear, singular next step, the user need. So I increased the visual prominence of the primary action, the design choice, to deliberately reduce cognitive load, the reason. We traded off some secondary screen real estate, the trade-off, but this should definitively improve our completion rates, the outcome.
Wow. When you frame it like that, it's virtually impossible for a stakeholder to argue based on personal taste because you've anchored every pixel in logic and business value.
Exactly.
But let's be real, sometimes they still argue. Disagreement is inevitable. How does this manual handle conflict when a stakeholder just flat out hates the direction?
It starts by eliminating a very specific phrase from your vocabulary. The manual points out that senior designers never say, that's bad UX.
Wait, really? Why not? If it's bad UX, shouldn't they call it out?
Because saying that's bad UX is a conversation killer. It makes you sound like an academic gatekeeper.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, psychologically, when you say that's bad UX, you are basically attacking the stakeholder's taste and intelligence, which instantly triggers defensiveness. Instead, senior designers use risk language and outcome language to reframe the conflict.
So instead of saying adding a 5th step to this checkout flow is bad UX, they would say,
They would say, the risk with adding a 5th step to this flow is that our current analytics show a massive drop-off after step 3. If our shared outcome goal is faster completion, this new step fundamentally works against that.
Ah, you've shifted the enemy. The enemy is no longer the stakeholder's idea. The enemy is the risk to the conversion rate. You're both looking at a shared business problem.
This raises an important question for anyone listening. When you disagree at work, are you fighting for your design ego or are you fighting for the outcome?
That's a great question.
A senior professional treats pushback as raw data. They don't get mad. They ask what's driving the pushback. Is the stakeholder worried about a fixed marketing deadline? Are they worried about technical effort? Once you uncover the real driver, you work through the trade-offs together.
Okay, so you've navigated the boardroom, you've won the arguments, you've aligned the stakeholders, and everyone is happy. But the manual pivots hard here into the 4th phase, which is the reality check. Because once you leave the boardroom, the real enemy is reality.
Reality always wins.
Right. You hand over the design, and you suddenly have to account for missing data, timed out servers, and all these edge cases.
The manual warns heavily against the trap of designing only the happy path, the ideal scenario where everything works perfectly. A beautiful, static screen of a happy path is essentially useless to an engineering team.
Because things break.
Exactly. Delivery-ready design requires exhaustively mapping the unhappy paths. What happens when the database returns 0 results? What does a failed server request look like? How do role-based permissions change the navigation? And crucially, does the whole thing meet accessibility standards like keyboard navigation and color contrast?
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's the exact difference between an artist drawing a sleek, futuristic concept car and a mechanical engineer designing a car that actually has to survive a 60-mile-per-hour crash test.
I love that.
The concept car looks amazing rotating on a pedestal at a trade show, but you can't drive it in the rain.
That is the perfect analogy because it explains the mechanics of what happens next. Design quality assurance or design QA during the build phase. When the designer is checking the coded product, they aren't just hovering over the developer's shoulder being pixel obsessed.
Making sure the padding is exactly 16 pixels.
Right, they are checking to see if the windshield wipers actually work. They're ensuring that the built experience still supports the intended user flow even when the data is messy. You are QAing the intent, not just the pixels.
Queuing the intent. That ties all the way back to the developer alignment we talked about earlier. So we've covered the mindset shift, aligning the core team, surviving the boardroom, and delivering in reality. That leaves us with the final phase of the manual proving your worth. If you have mastered problem solving, collaboration, stakeholder management, and delivery, how do you actually communicate that value to advance your career?
It tackles this through the lens of interviews, portfolios, and leadership. For interviews, the manual gives a really stern warning against giving generic, process-heavy answers.
Like what?
Well, if an interviewer asks about your process and you reply with a robotic explanation of the double diamond design process like, I ideate, I prototype, and I test, you sound like every other candidate. You aren't demonstrating product judgment.
You're just reciting a textbook. So how do they show that judgment?
The manual recommends the CPADR framework: context, problem, action, decision, and result. Interviewers want to hear about constraints. They want to hear about a time you had to compromise with a stubborn engineer, or a time the analytics totally contradicted your core assumptions and what decision you made to fix it.
It's messy stuff.
Yes. That framework forces you to talk about the messy reality of the job.
Which flows perfectly into how they recommend structuring a portfolio. A portfolio should just be a visual museum of every single wireframe you've ever drawn. Nobody wants a tour of a generic settings menu.
Please no.
It needs to be a product story.
Yes, a narrative of problem solving. You have to show what was fundamentally broken before you arrived. You have to explicitly outline the constraints you faced. Maybe you only had 2 weeks, or you were dealing with a deeply outdated legacy tech stack, and then show what actually changed because of your intervention.
And the manual makes a really strong point here regarding those results. Do not invent fake metrics.
It destroys your credibility instantly.
Like, completely.
If you were working on an internal tool and you don't have quantitative revenue data, do not pretend you increased sales by 400%. Talk about qualitative outcomes. You successfully reduced ambiguity, you got warring stakeholders aligned, you shipped a clearer workflow that reduced support tickets. Credibility matters infinitely more than superficial manufactured polish.
Okay, that brings us to the final concept in the manual: leadership readiness. And the source reveals something I think a massive portion of the workforce needs to hear. You do not need a manager title to be a leader.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, leadership in UX, and honestly in any complex discipline, is about influence without authority.
Influence without authority.
Yeah.
How does a designer actually manifest that on like a random Tuesday?
It looks like creating shared design patterns that make the whole engineering team move faster. It looks like stepping in to improve the way the team handles that DCI critique process we talked about earlier. It looks like mentoring a junior designer, not by telling them how to make their drop shadows prettier, but by helping them explain their decisions using that context and trade-off framework.
It's shifting your focus from how good is my personal work to how good is the team's collective decision-making.
Exactly. Moving to a senior or lead role is about raising the overall quality of the team's output. You become a multiplier of good decisions rather than just seeking a title progression for your own ego.
So what does this all mean? We've explored the entire arc of this manual, from redefining your role away from just making screens to digging for the real problem like testing the soil for a bridge. We've looked at partnering with PMs and devs to shape the MVP, translating subjective stakeholder opinions into business intent, surviving the unhappy paths of delivery, and finally, proving your impact through real product stories.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. But the core thesis here seems to be that seniority in UX, and truly in any product role, is less about the technical deliverables you physically produce, and entirely about the quality of the decisions you help your team make.
That is the perfect synthesis. Every single framework and mindset shift in this manual is a tool for cutting through the noise, managing the inevitable friction of human dynamics, and ensuring that when the engineers finally start writing code, they are building something that actually solves a real problem.
For you listening, Whether you are writing the code, managing the roadmap, or designing the interface, applying these lessons is your shortcut to cutting through the ambiguity. It's how you stop wasting time, money, and your own sanity building the wrong things.
And it leaves us with a rather provocative thought to ponder. If a senior designer's greatest value is uncovering the true problem, diagnosing the reality, and reducing ambiguity before a single screen is ever built,
Yeah.
might the ultimate senior design solution sometimes be realizing that you don't need to build a new interface at all?
Oh, wow. Like realizing the bridge request was flawed from the start and what the town actually needed was just a better ferry schedule.
Exactly. Sometimes the highest impact product decision you can possibly make is realizing the user's problem can be solved by changing a back-end business process rather than writing a single line of front-end code.
That is a fascinating place to leave it. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Take these frameworks, ask better questions, and go help your team make better decisions.